Hi everybody, this is part 3. So if you haven't watched my other videos in the series, you can go back and take a look at those. I have 2 other parts and this is the 3rd part. I'll be showing you how I wash the yarn, how I hang it up to dry, how I skein it after I've done dyeing it. As well, we're going to talk about cleaning. So how I clean the tools that I use, which is very important. Washing pans, things like that. That's an important part of the dye process, even though it's not the most fun part, but it's necessary. So I'll be showing you how I deal with that as well. So I hope that you find this video very informative and useful and helpful on your dye journey. So let's get into it.
Washing yarn is fairly straightforward, but there is a few things to keep in mind, especially when dealing with protein fibers. So you want to make sure that you're not agitating the yarn too much as you wash it, because this can cause the yarn to frizz up or felt. Also, extreme differences in temperature can have the same effect. So when the yarn is finished dyeing, make sure that it cools completely, and then immerse the yarn, or the water that you're using to wash your yarn. Make sure that it is cool or at least the same temperature as the yarn, so that the fibers don't get shocked, because that can cause it to felt as well. Also, the soap, use a soap that's mild and that is formulated for woolens, like soak wash. That is specifically formulated for woolens. I personally like to use Dr. Bronner's. It's not necessarily a wash that's formulated for woolens, but it does have natural oils in it, and it's gentle. And so I like to wash the finished yarn after I've dyed it. I like to use the Dr. Bronner's. A little goes a long way, and it does a really good job. I use an unscented wash as well, because my yarn is going into other people's homes and I don't know what kind of fragrance sensitivities they have, so I use unscented, but it's up to you what type of soap you want to use, if you want to use a scented soap or not. So you can see me here just preparing the yarn to hang up. So what we do is we put rings on it, so that enables us to hang it up on these drying racks that we have. I have very little space, so we had to devise this method so that I could put the maximum amount of yarn, hang it up to dry in a small space. So this has worked really well for us, and you can see us just doing that. We can wheel these clothing racks out of the way. We hang the yarn from the rings on hangers, and we can get up to 6 skeins of yarn on a hanger. So that really helps to compact the space, and we can hang a lot up.
So now I'm going to show you how to skein yarn. So this is the form that I sell my yarn in, and I'm going to be honest, it's probably going to be hard for me to explain. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to demonstrate it, and then you can just keep watching to see how it is that I do it. All right, so again, I hold it firmly between my 2 hands, and I make sure there's some tension, and I keep that tension on the yarn as I twist it. So I'm going to twist it 5 times, and I'm going to use my right hand to do that. That's just me. If you're left-handed or if you find a different way to do it, that's what you'll do. And make sure to keep that tension there. And then just to help the yarn twist back on itself, I'll just put my thumbs in the middle, and it just helps get the skein in the shape that I want. So I'm going to put both of those loops, both of the end loops, on one hand just so I can straighten out the rest of the skein. Okay, so I just kind of shape it, tug on it just to make it look nice and neat. I had some loose ends here, like this is what's holding the yarn together. So just tuck those in, or you can do that at the end. All right. And now I'm going to take those 2 loops again. I like to take the loop that's in my right hand and give it 2 more twists. And in the loop that's in my left hand, I just twist it once. And so the left hand loop, I'm now going to put through the loop that's on my right hand. And then there's the skein done. So I think you'll find that when you do these the first few times, it's going to come out really messy and it's going to be awkward and you're probably going to be frustrated. But don't let that stop you. Just keep practicing, and before you know it, you'll be able to do it without even thinking. So what I was skeining before, that was a mohair yarn. So this is a merino yarn. So this yarn is about the same length as that mohair that I did. So I'm going to skein it up the same way. So just tugging it like this, it just helps get all the strands nice and straight and even, so that, you know, you'll have a nice, neat skein when you're done. So remember, keep that tension. I'm going to twist this yarn 5 times. Now, one thing to keep in mind too is you don't want to twist your skeins too tight, because it can stretch the yarn, especially if it's a superwash yarn. Superwash yarn, because of the process that it's gone for, it does lose, it's more susceptible to losing its elasticity if you put too much tension on it. So you'll have to see what works for you. I like the yarn to look nice and neat, so I do add some tightness to it, but not so much that it's going to disrupt the fibers of the yarn in any way. So I just have enough tension that it looks nice and neat. The finished product looks nice and neat. So you'll have to determine that for yourself. Okay, so I'm going to take that and just tug on the end just to make everything look nice and even. So you can see that's already the start of our skein. And now I'm going to finish up with these end loops here. So I'm going to twist twice, and then twist this side once, and then just pull it through. All right, and just loose ends like this, just neaten them up and tuck them in. You can always find a spot to tuck them in. And so there's that. Okay, I'll just quickly do this last one too. And as you get used to it, you'll just be able to, just like how I'm doing, you just do it quickly without thinking. Tuck the ends in as you go. And then done. So let me show you on a longer length of yarn. Okay, so this yarn is a lot longer. The length, you'll see the way that it's been wound from the supplier, that is a lot longer than the yarn I was demonstrating before. So I found that twisting this about 6 times gives me a nice tension that's not too tight, but not too loose. So I'm going to do 6 twists for this one. And remember, I just, keep even tension on it so that it, it stays, the yarn all stays in place. Again, I'm going to break it in the middle, and so it will twist up on itself. A length like this, another thing that might be helpful is instead of using your thumbs, you can use your elbow to break it. So, that's an option as well. But I find that I can just do this. But if you want, let me just do it. You can use your elbow to break it, and then it will twist in on itself when you let go. Okay, so again, just straighten out the yarn. And then we're going to do the same thing with the 2 loops. I treat it just the same as with the shorter skein of yarn. I twist the right side twice, and then the left side once. Then I tuck the left side into the right side loop. Tuck in any loose strands. And there is our yarn skeined up. Now when I look at this one that I just skeined up, it looks a bit fatter than the one here. So I think I skeined this looser. I think I probably did about 7 twists on this one. So you see how you get, it's just a tighter skein. So it's going to be your preference. It's how you want your skein to look. Honestly, I think I prefer it a bit tighter. So I'm going to redo this. This looks a bit sloppy to me, but again, it's to your taste. This still isn't too tight. When I feel it, it looks nice and neat, but I can tell when I feel it that it's not too tight so that it's putting any strain or tension on the fibers. So I'm going to redo this and try it with 7 twists instead. So do you see all of that? See all that residue? So that is what has been left in the pan from my last dye session. You can see along the edges too. You can see that bit of turquoise around the edge. So we need to get all of that out of the pan. And I just want to demonstrate that usually with dyes like this, you need to be a little bit more vigorous in order to get all of that color out of the pan. Because remember, the yarn has been baking pretty much. So this color has been baked into the metal of the pan. So if I just put some soap in there, and then just simply use a rag, Okay, that looks pretty good, right? But if you look carefully, I'm hoping that the camera is picking up, there still is some residue that's in the pan. It's very light, but if it's not removed during the next dye session, when I place yarn in here and apply the water, that yarn will pick up. It'll react. The little bit of dye that's in there will be activated, and the yarn will pick up that color, even though you don't see much in here. So I do find that for the most part, just using water and soap and a rag doesn't quite do good enough a job, because I have to make sure that all of that dye from previous sessions is out of the pan so that I don't ruin the colors of other yarn. So what I like to do instead is I do use a bit of the soap still. But then I use a powder scrub like a Ajax or whatever. And then some kind of scrubber, because you're going to need that abrasiveness to really get the last bits of that dye out of the pan. So you can see here, this is what I'm trying to get rid of. Hopefully the camera is picking that up, but there still is some dye here. And here you can see it's orange here. It's orange in the corners. See that? It's orange in the corners. You can see here, that still is a lot of dye that was left in that pan. Just really put some muscle into it. So if you just look at that, if you look at the color of that soap, you can see that there's quite a lot of color that was picked up again, that orange color. So that is dye that potentially could have contaminated our next dye session. So I just wanted to show that it's really important to scrub your pans well, and that goes the same for any utensils that you're going to use as well, because you can cross-contaminate your utensils as well. If, for example, if you don't clean a spoon off properly and then you dip it, you use it to stir another batch of yarn that you're dyeing, and there's a color in there that's not what you want, for sure it's going to come off in the yarn. So make sure that your tools are very clean as well. So let's just see how we did this time. All right, so that looks pretty good. So same goes for any materials or any utensils, measuring cups, you know. And last but not least, I also make sure to give the sinks. Give my sink a good scrub too, because there's going to be dye in the sink too. And this is where I soak yarn that hasn't been dyed. This is also where I wash yarn. So I want to make sure that the sink itself is clean so that I don't potentially ruin a skein of yarn because I accidentally left some dye in the sink and then it was transferred to that yarn. So, you know, these might all seem like obvious things, but I do think, you know, it's important to point these things out because, you know, I've learned the hard way by ruining some yarns. So I'm going to pass on these tips to you, no matter how silly they might sound. You might think, well, that's obvious, or just use common sense. But sometimes, you know, unless it's mentioned, little tips like this are things that you just don't think about. So and one thing to remember is dye gets everywhere. Those little particles, you might not even see them, but they're there, and just a tiniest amount of water will activate it again, and then before you know it, you can have a big mess. So, you know, just make sure everything is cleaned properly. So there you have it. That is the third video in my Basics of Hand-Dyed Yarn. And I think I've pretty much covered everything that you need to know in order to get started with hand-dyed yarn. So I'm probably missing a few things, but I think you'll have a really good foundation or start on your hand-dyed yarn journey. So whether you want to get serious about it or whether you just want to play around and experiment, I'm hoping that the videos in this basics series will give you the confidence and just give you what you need to get you on the right start to dyeing beautiful yarn. So again, you can go through my other videos as well and give yourself a refresher. If you haven't viewed those at all, then I highly recommend that you do. View them in order because it will make more sense and it will give you a really good foundation to get you started on dyeing protein fibers. So the next video I'm going to be doing is actually getting into the techniques. We're actually going to start applying some color to yarn. So I know that that's what you're all looking forward to, is seeing some of the techniques and methods that I use. So again, these are techniques that I use personally. It is by no means, you know, the only way or the right way to dye yarn, because really, you know, if you're getting the results that you want, then you know, it really doesn't matter how you dye it. As long as you're happy with your results, then, you know, you're doing a good job. So I'm just going to show you what works for me. And then from there, you're going to experiment and you're going to come up with your own methods and techniques. And, you know, if you try certain things, then please leave them in the comments below so that others can benefit from what you've learned, you know, because we can all learn from each other. And, you know, we're never going to stop learning. I definitely don't know everything. I am constantly learning and I enjoy that process. So I'm sure that that's something that you will find beneficial as well. So again, in the next video, we're going to be talking about dyeing solid or semi-solid colors. So this is where we just take one color of dye and try to get it as uniform as possible over the skeins of yarn. So I hope that you join me for that next lesson, and I look forward to showing you it. All right, so until next time, bye.